Welcome to the 2022 Kentucky Bourbon Festival and the first edition of the Bourbon 30 Talk Show. This is sponsored by Great Western Malting. Welcome, everybody, to another issue, or I should say another episode of the Bourbon 30 Talk Show. Everybody relaxed and having some fun? You like the aviation project? That's the band. I need to see some dancing out there. Not from me. Y'all don't need to see me dance. Y'all get worried about my health. You think maybe there was a seizure happening or something. But glad you're here. I'm Steve Coomes. I'm the host of Bourbon 30. I'm also the Director of Content and Programming for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So any of the seminars you're seeing here this weekend, something I helped create. But let's talk about the real talent in the room, or at least on the stage. I mean, want to welcome Gregg Snyder, the Master Distiller of Chicken Cock Whiskey, to the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. How are you, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I'm doing great, Everybody having a great time?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful festival. I actually attended the very first one, 31 years ago, I guess it was?
Oh, my God.
And,
Tell
it's
us
done
about
nothing
this.
but gotten better.
Let's get nostalgic right out of the box. It was kind of small, I understand.
Oh, yeah. The first one, actually, we held it over at the Stephen Foster, my old Kentucky home park. And they said, hey, we're going to have a gathering of the industry, the celebration. And it was a one-night deal. We had appetizer finger food. But all the distilleries, there was about 8 of us, I think, at that time. We all brought some of our bourbon. We set it on the bar, and we just had a cocktail party that night. And that was it. That was the extent of the very first bourbon festival. So
I think Jimmy Russell talked about that. He said it was so much fun because you guys got to talk to each other. You never get to talk to each other. You know, he said it was like a kind of fellowship meeting for the whiskey guys. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was indeed, yeah. And Jimmy's right about that.
I wish he were here to see this. I know he's around. He just hadn't come to the festival. But this is pretty cool, pretty different. Yeah. So, Greg, first tell us a little bit about your work with Chicken Cock Whiskey, or is it Chicken Cock Bourbon? No, because it's whiskey,
Well, we've got whiskeys, yeah. We got our bourbon and rye and a couple of
I've had all
limited
those.
time offerings.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm actually into my 45th year of working in the industry. I actually started in this industry 1978, right out of college. And I have a business degree from Indiana University. And one of the schools, or one of the companies I interviewed with, was Joseph E. Seagerman's son. They had a facility at that time in Louisville, Kentucky. But anyhow, I've worked for
Where
just
was
about...
that? What was the Seagram's facility in Louisville?
It was Joseph E. Seagerman's son, but it was the Calvert Distilling Company.
Okay,
they
sure.
called it. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
It was there on 7th Street. I don't know if you know where it
I
was
know
at.
of it, but
7th and Central, but right there. Anyhow, a lot of heritage, but been working for just about every company in the business in various capacities. And about 5 years ago, I decided to ramp up my retirement plan, and that was not retire, but start my own consulting company. And one of the first clients I picked up was Grain and Barrel Spirits, the company that actually owns Chicken Cock Whiskey. So that's really, I actually started out helping them with some supply chain issues, some operational stuff. And the little history about the brand. The brand actually originated in Paris, Kentucky in 1856.
Oh, my.
So, I mean, it predates Civil War, it predates Jack Daniels, predates a lot of stuff. And it's an old brand. A lot of neat history. But the brand, the distillery actually burnt down in the 1950s. And the company that owned it decided not to rebuild, and the brand just sat idle. Well, in 2011, the founder of Grain and Barrel Spirits, Marty Antela, Marty was looking for a whiskey brand. And he did some research, and he ran across the history of chicken cock and found it interesting. And he was able to acquire the brand rights. And starting out, small company, they needed cash flow. So he was able to acquire some 6-month-old whiskey. He put it in an aluminum bottle. And I think they had a root beer flavor. They had a cinnamon flavor. They had various flavors. And, it served its purpose. It created cash flow, but it didn't really help the brand with its brand, brand reputation. The brand reputation it had many, many years ago was outstanding. And so, like I said, 2017, I started my consulting company and helped these guys out. But Monty came to me one day, and he shared his vision of wanting to resurrect chicken cock back to Kentucky and bring it back to its high-quality prominence. And he said, would you help me resurrect the brand back to Kentucky and serve in a role of master distiller? And I said, I'll do it on one condition. You stop buying this junk crap, and let's truly focus on bringing the brand back.
Wow,
Put our whole
that's
attention.
bold.
And so he agreed.
I'll take the job if you do what I say. That's kind of what you're saying.
So he agreed. And so, yeah, the first thing I did was negotiate an agreement with Bardstown Bourbon Company. And that's the home of Chicken Cock. We're making our whiskey at Bardstown Bourbon Company. For those that aren't familiar with them, they're on the other side of the Bluegrass Parkway, a beautiful facility. They've assembled probably the best team in the industry, and they're making some fantastic whiskey.
Who's been there? Who's been to Bardstown Bourbon Company?
Yeah.
It's an amazing place, isn't it?
Yeah, if you haven't, you need to go. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. But they have a little bit different program. You know, there are distilleries that do contract distillation. They'll make whiskey and put it in barrels, and you can buy those barrels. But at Bardstown Bourbon Company, they have what they call a collaborative distillation program. Basically, I give them the mash bills for a bourbon and a rye, but then I also give them the work instructions, the time and temperatures I want to cook the grains, the enzymes I want to use, the specifications for fermentation, beer chemistry, and distillation. And then when they make our whiskey, I go down and oversee the process. So I have complete oversight over everything they're doing for Chicken Cock bourbon and rye.
And that's unusual in the industry, right?
It is. It's unique. But one thing that makes Chicken Cock even more unique, 12 of my 45 years in the business, I worked for Brown Forman. 9 of those 12 years, I actually managed their cooperage operations. So I've made whiskey, I've aged whiskey, I've bottled and shipped whiskey, but I've also made barrels, and I totally understand the importance of that white oak barrel. 60 to 70% of the flavor in a good quality bottle of whiskey comes from that white oak barrel.
And all the color.
And so
Yeah.
early on when I started my consulting business, another client I picked up was a group of guys in West Virginia, in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And they wanted to start a business to create jobs for that economically depressed area in the Appalachian Mountains. And so they decided to build a cooperage. So through a friend of a friend, they reached out to me and said, hey, can you help us build a cooperage? So I agreed. I helped them design the cooperage. I helped them build the stave mill. When they got the stave mill built, I went out and I trained their employees how to quarter saw white oak, how to cut staves and heading, what defects to look for, how to edge it up, how to stack it so you get good airflow through the stacks. And then when they got the cooperage built, I went out and trained their employees how to build barrels. But through that relationship for Chicken Cock, I go out a year in advance to the stave mill. It's right outside of Union, West Virginia. And I go out in the log yard, and usually I'm wading up to mud in my knees, but I'm selecting every log out of their log yard that we're going to use to cut into staves and heading, and then we natural air dry it for 9 to 12 months outside there at the stave mill. And then about a week and a half before we're scheduled to make our bourbon or our rye at Bardstown, I go back out to West Virginia, and they bring that wood in. I make sure they construct every barrel properly. I make sure they toast every barrel properly. We use a deep penetrating medium plus toast before we're charred. And then when we do char, I'm only charred at number 3 level char. So basically I have oversight from bark to barrel to bourbon to bottle. So that's something unique. I don't know if anybody else.
Bark to barrel to bourbon to bottle.
Yes, sir.
I love that. That's awesome. What are you looking for when you were looking at that log? First, what is it that you say that makes you say, I want that log?
Okay, well, one of the reasons I like the Appalachian regions, they have a high percentage of extremely tight grain oak, and I'm looking for extremely tight grain oak. If you look at the end of the log, you see the annual growth rings. Tight grain oak by industry standard is at least 10 annual growth rings per inch. Most of the white oak logs coming out of those mountains are averaging 12 to 15 annual growth rings per inch. Now, what I'm looking for is tight grain. Well, why tight grain? Tight grain, you have a much higher concentration, a much higher density of the hemicellulose and lignin, 2 of the chemical components in white oak that are critical to creating great flavor. So you take a standard barrel, 53-gallon barrel. If you measure the circumference at the bilge, at the belly, it's 81 inches in circumference, okay? You take that 81 inches times 12 to 15 annual growth rings per inch, and you're looking at over 1,000 years of growth in one barrel. So you're getting a much higher density, a much higher concentration of the hemicellulose and lignin, which can create more flavor when you toast it properly.
Now talk about that. Does everybody know what toasting is versus charring?
So toasting.
Anybody know?
Yeah, we're not actually setting the barrel on fire. So first off, let's talk about natural air dry, because that's an important part of the process. I set those staves and heading outside. I want the rain and the snow and the wind and the hot and the cold hitting that wood, because what it does, it creates a fungal growth on the outside of that wood. And within that fungus, the microbial activity starts degrading the cellular structure by opening up the grain. By opening up the grain, when that wind and that precipitation hits it, it washes and leaches out a lot of the harsh tannins, harsh tannic acid, and other bitter phenolic compounds you don't want to impart in the flavor into your whiskey. So number one, it's washing all that out. But by degrading the cellular structure, it opens up that grain and allows the heat to go deep penetrating. So when you build a barrel, you take the staves that have been planed and jointed, and they put them in a temporary hoop. Then they're going to run that through a steam tunnel to put a little moisture in it, heat it up, and make it pliable. So when it comes out, they have a big cone, comes down, it bends those staves, and they put a hoop on the other side. So basically, you have the outer shell of the barrel. You don't have the heads in it, just the outer shell. Part of the equipment that I helped them design out there is a toasting carousel. It's a big carousel, and they have turrets that spin. And so you set the barrel on a turret, and it's spinning as it goes around this carousel. Before it takes off, there's a 36-inch long infrared heating element goes inside there. So it's the entire length of the barrel. I believe in process control. And there's so many variables in this industry that you can't control. But as long as you can control those that you're able to, you can get a much more consistent, higher quality product. So what happens is I'm applying the same amount of heat top to bottom from that barrel for the same length of time. It's coming off those heaters at about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's penetrating deep into that wood. So I mentioned the hemicellulose and lignin. Basically, white oak, one of the reasons white oak is used, when you quarter saw it, it won't leak. Red oak, maple, other species don't contain a substance called celluloses, and it'll leak. Number two is the chemical composition. You got cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Cellulose is a primary cellular structure that makes that wood hard and strong. The hemicellulose is where the sugars, the wood sugars are, polysaccharides. And so when you heat that barrel up, you set it on that toasting equipment carousel, and it starts spinning around, and all that heat is penetrating deep into it because we opened up the grain. It's just like taking sugar in a spoon, and you hold it over a Bunsen burner. What's it do? It starts melting and caramelizing on you. That's where your caramel flavors are coming from. Likewise, when you give that deep penetrating toast, the lignin gets converted into vanillin, and that's where your vanilla flavors are coming from. So it's two important crystals. So we're trying to get as deep into that wood as we can and create as much flavor as that white oak has to offer. Later in the process, I'm just going to chart a number 3 level char, okay?
What's that, 45 seconds?
Depends on the equipment itself. Mm-hmm. Out there, it's actually a little bit less than that, but it depends on the equipment that we're using. But you know, people say, well, why don't you use a number 4 level char? You know, 4 being the heaviest, deepest. The reason I don't use a 4 level char, I just created a bunch of great flavor in the toasting process. The last thing I want to do is burn it away.
Right. Yeah.
All you need for that char layer, you know, a lot of people think that char layer gives it flavor and color. Well, it may enhance the color a little bit, but its primary purpose is a charcoal filter. You taste whiskey right off the still, and you're going to taste that corn and that rye and that malted barley and that yeast. And that's what you want to taste. That's a great foundation for a great whiskey. But in the hot of the summer, you know, that air expands in that barrel and it pushes that whiskey through that char layer. And then in the cold at night and in cold of the winter, it contracts back out, and it's that movement in and out. So it's stripping that charcoal, filtering the graininess out of that whiskey, and it's picking up all those great caramel and vanilla and oak lactones as it pulls it back out. And so, again, by taking full advantage of what that barrel has to offer in flavor, we're creating much more flavor to extract. 80 to 90% of the distilleries in Kentucky, they don't air dry, natural air dry, number one.
What's it, kiln dry?
You know, it's usually kiln dried. And they use a number 4 level char, no toast, okay? Number 4 level char, you're going to get about an 1/8 inch of char on the inner surface, and you're going to get about a 1/16 of the red layer, the conversion to the hemicellulose and lignin. So you only take advantage of 3/16 of an inch of wood. Well, that whiskey's going to soak a 1/2 inch into that stave. And so there's 5/16 of an inch of flavor that was never created. Now, there's reasons for that. You know, I use a number, but I'll use Jim Beam. I worked for Jim Beam for a while, and I love their whiskey. They're making some great bourbons. But most of their bourbon is number 4 level char, no toast. Well, it costs about $50 more a barrel to natural air dry the wood, number one, and then to toast it before you char it. Well, Jim Beam fills over 500,000 barrels a year. That's $25 million they just didn't have to spend on barrels. So there's economic reasons for it.
Sure,
you know.
sure.
So, but luckily, you know, Chickencock, we're small. This year in February, I laid down 1,000 barrels of bourbon. In March, I laid down 200 barrels of rye. That's it for the year.
Wow.
We're very small. And so being small, I can take my 45 years and really focus it and pay attention to detail to do all those little things that are going to give us more flavor.
Yeah, I mean, that's so much smaller than what you ever saw at Brown Forman or Seagram's or anything. Do you like this small size?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've worked for you know, again, 5 years ago, that's in 2017, you know, I was ready to get out of the corporate rat race and ramp up my retirement plan. That's what I said. my retirement plan was to start my own consulting company and try to share my years of knowledge and experience with a brand like Chicken Cock.
Let's ask a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the brand name itself. Why the redundant name?
That's the first question I get. I do tastings all over the country, and the first question I get, where the hell did you come up with that name? And so I'd say, well, true story. The brand originated in Paris, Kentucky in 1856. A gentleman by the name of James A. Miller built this distillery in Paris, and he was making a whiskey he was so proud of, he felt it was worth crowing about. So he called it Chicken Cock whiskey. Now, you got to remember, 1856, Americans were still using the Old English language. Okay? The term for a male chicken was a cock. The term rooster didn't come about to the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Oh, didn't know that.
And so that's how it got its name. You know, people, it's amazing, especially during tasting, and people have been a little overserved. Man, there's all kinds of comedians out there that have fun with the name. So.
I'm sure of that. I love the bottle design. I don't know if you people can see it, but it is like chicken wire.
Exactly. Yeah. Actually,
it's beautiful.
We've got two bottle designs. We have this one, and then the one we use for our limited time offerings. If you haven't seen it, come over to our booth because we have both of them over there. But both bottles are actually replicas of pre-prohibition bottles that Chicken Cock used. Back then, they were pint sizes, and we just blew it up to a 750. And you're right. A lot of people says, "Oh, has that got honey in it? It's got a honeycomb pattern on it." I said, "No, that's chicken wire."
Yeah, there's the rooster right there.
Yeah, the rooster's on the back. That's right. Yeah.
So what are we looking at here age-wise? It's a non-age statement, right?
It's a non-age statement, but that current offering we have here, that actually has some of the first 4-year-old that I was personally responsible for producing for Chicken Cock. But then you got to remember, when we started our relationship with Bardstown Bourbon Company, you know, that's what I tell people. You want to get in the bourbon industry, you better have pockets full of money and you better have a lot of patience because it takes time. And so while we laid down bourbon, we had to wait till at least got 4 years old. And so in the meantime, part of my responsibility, I go out and try to find good quality whiskey that we could acquire and put under the Chicken Cock label. So this actually is predominantly the 4-year-old, the first 4-year-old that I was responsible for, but it also has some 7 and some 15-year-old in. It's bottled at 90 proof.
So we tasting that if you go over there?
Absolutely. We have our Chicken Cock Kentucky Straight Bourbon at 90 proof. We have our Chicken Cock Kentucky Straight Rye at bourbon proof. We have our Chicken Cock Island Rooster, which is our rye that I finished in rum barrels. It actually sat in rum barrels for about 6 months. And it's awesome. We can still get the spicy, peppery notes of the rye, but that little bit of sweetness just enhances the flavor so much. It's a 95 proof. And then the other offering we're letting people taste, it's our very first barrel pick. The very first barrel pick for Chicken Cock we did in honor of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. And we're tasting it over there while it lasts. It's going fast, but they're actually selling it. The Bourbon Festival's selling it through the Justin's House of Bourbon over here in the tent, over in the far corner.
Yeah, I think the line is somewhere over there.
It just kept going. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you buy a bottle, you want me to sign it, I'll be at the booth until 4 o'clock today. Tomorrow and Sunday, I'll be here from 1 to 4 as well.
No charge, right? You're not some diva. It's gonna
no, I tell people
that
signature. I tell you what, that signature is so valuable. You take that signature and a $20 bill, and you'll get a small coffee at Starbucks. Promise.
I've had your 15-year several years ago, and it was, and in fact, I reviewed it. I think the price was $225 or $229, or
you got a deal because its suggested retail was $300 on it. So.
Well, that was in the press release. I just got my sample, and it was fantastic. And maybe I'm cheap, but I said, it is fabulous. There's no other thing you can say about it. I'm not going to part with $229 or whatever it was for it. I think that's just a lot of money. But it was great.
Yeah.
It was great. So are those stocks still out there that you can hunt down? And
I tell you what, it's rare. I tell people when I was doing that, going out and looking for good quality whiskey that we could acquire, put under the Chicken Cock label, I tell people that's like a treasure hunt. Some days you find treasure, some days you don't.
Yeah.
On that particular day, I found a rare gem. I don't believe in unicorns, but I believe in rare gems, and that day was something. That bourbon was phenomenal. In my top 5.
Yeah, I know we can't disclose the source, but how did you find it? Did you go to somebody's rick houses and we're looking at that and look at the edge of the barrel, or what?
Actually went to the rick house and found some. Typically, 15-year-old can be a little overwooded.
Sure.
Depending on where it is. These barrels were actually on the first floor, so it was cooler down there. They didn't have that overpowering liquid oak flavor to it.
Yeah.
And again, when I sampled the first barrel, I mean, I got to my nose. And it was not just chocolate covered cherries. I got dark chocolate covered cherries. You know how you get the bitter sweetness of the dark chocolate? And then when I tasted it, man, the flavors were just popping all over the place. It was so good.
It was fantastic.
Again, it's in my top 5 of all the bourbons I've tasted in my life. It's so good.
It was damn delicious.
And it was only sold in Kentucky. Such a small bottle. We bottled 1,371 bottles, and every bottle was sequentially numbered, and it was only sold in Kentucky.
How many barrels went into that?
It's 10 barrels.
Wow. So that's still not a ton of angel share, is it?
What's that?
I said that's still not a ton of angel
Yeah,
share.
it's average.
Yeah.
On the lower floors, it's gonna evaporate slower as well.
Did you recall the proof? I mean, did it lose proof on the lower
It was
floor?
it was 114 proof.
Wow. So it's probably a barrel at 125 or something.
It actually barrel at 120.
That's amazing.
Yep.
That's amazing. So describe your job. I mean, are you on the road promoting all the time, or are you doing the operation stuff?
I got the greatest job in the world, man. I tell you, I'm semi-retired. Okay. For Chicken Cock, again, I've got maybe a half a dozen consulting clients, but and I'm still looking to pick up a few more from time to time. But for Chicken Cock, I travel on the average maybe 1 week out of the month to a certain market doing promotional events, tastings, whiskey dinners, bottle signing events, and what have you, and it's fun. I get paid to do it, so hey.
Yeah, it's really funny. Probably better paid than your corporate jobs, right? The consulting's good.
Oh yeah, no, I enjoy working for myself.
Out of all the companies you worked for when you were a company man, what was your favorite?
Of all of them I worked for?
Yeah.
They all had their pluses and minuses. I don't think I could select one over the other. They were all great, seriously. I mean, Seagram's, Brown-Forman, Wild Turkey. It was owned by Pernod Ricard at the time. White Rock Distilleries was a privately owned company.
So was Dick Newman was it Austin Nichols when you were at Wild Turkey?
Actually, yeah, Pernod Ricard, when I started there, it was called Boulevard Distilleries. There was a joint venture between Pernod Ricard and Diageo. And then when Pernod Ricard and Diageo acquired Seagram's, Pernod Ricard took 100% ownership of Wild Turkey. But Austin Nichols was a DBA, okay, and then Wild Turkey Distillery was a DBA of Austin Nichols. So yeah, basically my job there, I was vice president of Austin Nichols and the managing director of Wild Turkey Distillery. So Jimmy and Eddie both worked for me during that time period, 10 years. So
that's why I know the folks at Mixers talk about Dick Newman, who led Austin Nichols for a long time. Did you not work for him?
I remember the name. No.
Anyway, so what's the future for Chicken Cock? I mean, you're saying 1,500 barrels. That's not a bunch.
1,200 barrels. Yeah, it's not a lot.
1,500 barrels is what Heaven Hill lays down every day.
Yeah. So compare that. Yeah. We've got a lot of things coming up. Actually, we just bottled our second LTO, our limited time offering this year at Bardstown Bourbon Company. It's called Chicken Cock Chanticleer. Chanticleer is French for rooster.
Oh.
And it's actually bourbon that we finished in a cognac barrel.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And the suggested retail price is $500 a bottle. So.
Well, $500.
Yeah.
They got that.
It's actually in a tin, a commemorative
cushions.
tin, and it's. I don't set the pricing, so don't boo me, please. We've got some pretty proud owners that.
And so like Brown-Forman and Wild Turkey alone were companies that when you were there were not into the super premium game at that point. What's it like now? I mean, because you're quick to say, I know it's not for everybody. Those prices. Is that a good thing for the industry that it's changing like that?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, again, I got it in 1978 when the industry was on a decline. Okay, and I saw it bottom out in the 1980s. And then late 80s, early 90s, the Japanese market and Australian markets had a little boom. And so bourbon saw a little upward blip. But really in the last 10, 12 years, to see it skyrocket like it has, it's so gratifying.
That's good.
I spent my entire career, and I love it. I mean, it gets in your blood. And, just one of those things. But
what was your favorite job? Was it overseeing the cooperage or distilling or what?
Again, boy, that's a hard question, Steve.
Because you've done every one of them, it sounds like.
What I'm doing right now, consulting. I love sharing my industry. I love being able to come in front of folks like this and talk about my favorite subject, whiskey. So, yeah.
Does anybody have a question for Gregg? Well, hell.
I think I just covered that, didn't I? It actually, rehash, yeah, it's an old brand originated in Paris, Kentucky. James A. Miller was making a whiskey when he built this distillery in 1856 that he thought it was so good it was worth crowing about. So he called it Chicken Cock Whiskey. There you go.
Did you have a question also, ma'am? No? Sir?
Mutual question. They weren't paying attention. osmosis process. So when you say osmosis, by accelerated maturation, okay. First off, there is no substitute for time and temperature, okay? Now, I don't believe in accelerated maturation. There are guys, very intelligent people, that have tried, and they've been able to take a 6-month-old whiskey and give it color to make it look like a 9-month-old whiskey and maybe taste like a 9-month-old whiskey, but there is no time or temperature. What I'm doing with the barrel, I'm making sure I'm taking full advantage of all the flavor that white oak has to offer. And so in 4 years, I taste our whiskey every 6 months. In 4 years, our whiskey is more comparable to a 6-year-old because there's much more flavor to extract. And so I'm able to pull it out. But osmosis, no. You got to have Mother Nature, time and temperature. And depending on where you're at in the country, bourbon can be made anywhere in the U.S. There's a lot of people that manually heat and cool their warehouses, and that's fine. You're going to get some cycling with that as well. But, yep.
Hey, well, and talk about also the esterification process. When you have that angel share and all of a sudden oxygen is in the barrel, I mean, you can't mimic that in rapid aging.
That's correct. That's correct.
Isn't that still kind of the dark arts of aging? It's like they know what's happening, but they don't really know the truth.
Yeah. Well, again, that's just one of those variables that are hard to control. It's like this year. I think we've already had, 44 days in the 90s, and we got some more coming next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a great year for maturing bourbon. I'm telling you.
Really? Is there no point of overkill? No.
Well, that's the thing. People think the older it is, the better it is. No. It's like there's a diminishing return. Basically, it gets so old, and then at some point in time, the wood flavor overtakes the profile, and it can taste like liquid oak. And so the older, the better is not true. So by law, to be a bourbon, one of the criteria is it has to have 51% corn in the mash bill. It can't come off the still higher than 160 proof. It has to be aged in a new charred oak container, it says. They were supposed to change that in the barrel, but new charred oak container, and it can't go into a barrel higher than 125 proof. So any of these man-made devices, it's got to be oak. No, I don't know if you missed it probably, but I actually... Through my knowledge and experience, I got a relationship with some guys in West Virginia Great Barrel Company is the name of the cooperage. And I go out and I personally select the logs that we're going to use to cut into staves and heading. We're going to natural air dry it for 9 to 12 months. And then the following year, about a week and a half before we're going to make our whiskey in Bardstown Bourbon Company, I go out there and I'm overseeing the construction of the barrel, make sure they construct it properly, make sure they toast them properly, every single barrel, and make sure they char every single barrel, number 3 level char. So. Yeah. Another question.
Yes, sir. The question was, what was the age range of your whiskey?
Yeah. So our age range right now, because again, I acquired some. We've made anywhere from 4-year up to 15-year-old. But stuff that we're making, I tell you what, the demand exceeds the supply. I'm trying to twist the arm of the owner of the company to hang on to some of it and let me have something special down the road. So I battle still battling that fight, but we'll get there. So my favorite, it depends on where it is. That's the style of warehouse it was aged in, what location of the warehouse. I mean, that's part of the beauty at Bardstown Bourbon Company. I've got a great relationship with those folks. Matter of fact, I think I'm the only non-employee that has a passkey to go anywhere I want to.
The only non-what?
Only non-employee that has a passkey. They let me take tours here all the time, but they're great people. But my relationship with Carrie, she kind of lets me cherry pick where I want to age our barrels in the warehouse as well. She's great to work with. So, but yeah, again, I'm dancing around you quick because there is it just depends. There's so many variables. Typically, I do like the older stuff, 8 to 12 years old on an average, but that can vary. The 15-year-old that we have, like I said, a lot of times that could be over oak, but that was so good.
Yeah, not that one.
People talk about Pappy. It's amazing that 23-year-old Pappy doesn't taste like liquid oak. And it's good bourbon, don't get me wrong. Julian Van Winkle's a dear friend of mine, and he's done a great job of creating a demand for his whiskeys. and they get a pretty penny for it. So,
And if you can ever get the Michter's 20 and 25, they're not over oaked, but they'll put a beating on your wallet.
and then what they do to get it that older, they'll put it on the lower floors. There's a lot of, and what happens in these Rick-style warehouses, ethanol vapors are heavier than air. And as the angel share takes place, these vapors go out and they settle on the lower floors. When you walk into any one of these, traditional Rick-style warehouses in Kentucky, and it's 90 degrees outside, you walk in, it's 70 degrees inside, and you're thinking, oh man, they turned on the air condition. No, there's no air condition. That's the alcohol bath. All those ethanol vapors settle on the lower floors, and you're in there so humid, but yet it's cool. And that's what it is, the alcohol bath.
There will be a test after this, especially that barrel part, the cooperage part.
Oh, we scratched the surface, man. We barely scratched the surface.
Gregg, thanks so much for joining us at the Bourbon Festival.
My pleasure, Steve.
My pleasure
Thank
to
you.
meet you face to face finally.
Yeah, right.
All right, get ready for some more dancing music from the
If you get a
Aviation
chance, if you haven't
Project.
visited us, our booth's right
That's right.
across over there, so come have your pour.